New York never truly slept, but some corners of the city felt forgotten even under its endless lights. The emergency entrance of St. Luke's Hospital buzzed with sirens and hurried footsteps, the kind of place where life and death brushed shoulders every hour. On the stone steps just beyond the glare of the sliding doors, a young woman sat pressed against the cold wall. Her name was Sarah. Her coat was thin, almost transparent against the wind. In her arms, 2 infants clung to her warmth, twin boys no older than a year. Their cheeks were pale, their breaths shallow, their tiny fists curled into her shirt as if they feared the world might let them go. Beside her, propped against the ground, was a piece of cardboard with words written in shaky black marker. "Please help. Need formula for my babies." Each gust of winter air rattled the cardboard. Each flicker of passing headlights washed over her face, showing the exhaustion carved into it. People walked past, nurses rushing in for the night shift, visitors clutching flowers, strangers huddling in coats. Some slowed down for a second, their eyes catching on the sight of the sign, before looking away just as quickly. Sarah lowered her gaze to her children. She pressed her lips against the forehead of the smaller boy, whispering, "Hold on, just a little longer." Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. Then came the sound of tires rolling against wet pavement. A black limousine pulled up, sleek and silent, its polished surface mirroring the hospital's lights. The rear window slid down. Inside sat a man in a tailored coat, his posture straight, his face framed by the faint glow of the dashboard. Jonathan Reed. To the world, he was the billionaire behind Reed Pharmaceuticals, a name tied to medical breakthroughs and gleaming skyscrapers. To Sarah, in that moment, he was only another stranger. But his eyes did not slide past her the way others had. They stopped. He studied the young woman hunched on the step, the twins curled into her chest, the cardboard trembling in her hands. The driver leaned forward waiting for instructions, but Jonathan didn't speak right away. Something in the scene held him still. Sarah noticed him and instinctively pulled the boys closer, bracing for judgment. Instead, Jonathan opened the door and stepped out into the cold. He walked to the back of the car, pressed a button, and the trunk lifted. From within, he pulled out a thick wool blanket, unused, folded, a spare he often kept for long drives, and a box of infant formula his assistant had purchased earlier that week for a company charity drop-off. He carried them over and set them down gently beside her. "Here," he said simply, his voice low but steady. Sarah blinked up at him, startled. The words lodged in her throat. All she managed was a whisper. "Thank you." Jonathan gave a short nod. He turned as if to leave, but then came the sound, sharp, jarring. One of the twins began to cough, the tiny body heaving against Sarah's arm. The cough grew harsher, each gasp thinner than the last. Sarah panicked, patting her son's back, her eyes wide. No, please." Jonathan froze. For a moment his instincts clashed, the habit of distance, the urge to move on. But as he watched the child struggle for air, something inside him shifted. A memory pressed against him, unbidden. The sterile light of a hospital room years ago, a small crib surrounded by machines, and silence where a heartbeat should have been. He turned back. "Come with me." Sarah looked up, confused. Jonathan extended his hand toward the hospital doors. "Now. They need to be seen." For a long second the world seemed suspended. The sirens in the distance, the cold wind pressing against them. Then Sarah gathered both boys in her arms, her knees trembling as she stood. Without another word she followed him through the sliding doors, into the bright chaos of the emergency room. The night that had begun on the sidewalk was about to change everything. The glass doors slid open with a hiss, spilling Sarah and the twins into the fluorescent brightness of St. Luke's emergency department. The smell of antiseptic stung her nose. The noise, beeping monitors, rushing nurses, the intercom calling for doctors, was overwhelming after the cold quiet outside. Jonathan walked a step ahead, his stride purposeful. People parted for him without even realizing it, the authority in his presence making way where there had been none. Sarah clutched her boys tighter, her legs unsteady, afraid she might collapse under the fluorescent glare. At the reception desk, a nurse looked up, ready to dismiss them into the crowded waiting area. Jonathan's voice cut through, calm but firm. "These children need to be seen now." The nurse blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, we're at capacity, without insurance. Intake." "They can't wait," Jonathan interrupted. His tone wasn't raised, but it carried weight. He pulled a card from his wallet, sliding it across the counter. "Bill me, Jonathan Reed." The name landed like a stone in water. Recognition flickered in the nurse's eyes, followed by urgency. "Dr. Patel, we need a room," she called down the hall. Within moments, Sarah was guided into an exam bay. She lowered the twins onto the narrow bed, her hands trembling as doctors gathered, attaching monitors, listening with stethoscopes. The older boy whimpered softly. His brother let out a weak cry that broke into coughing. Sarah stood frozen, unsure if she should step closer or stay out of the way. Jonathan stayed near the door, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He watched every movement with a gaze that was far too steady to be casual. One of the doctors finally turned. "They're underweight, malnourished, both show signs of respiratory distress, likely from exposure. We'll need labs and fluids." Sarah's knees buckled. She gripped the bed rail, whispering, "I tried, I didn't have." Her words broke apart. Jonathan's eyes shifted toward her for the first time inside the room. He didn't speak comfort. He wasn't sure how, but he stayed there, unmoving, a presence that kept her from collapsing entirely. The younger boy began to cry harder as a nurse inserted an IV. Sarah bent down quickly, pressing her forehead to his. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." The doctor gave instructions, the team moving efficiently. Amid the blur of motion, Jonathan reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered, hesitating as if about to call someone. Then he stopped. Instead, he slipped it back into his pocket. Minutes stretched. Machines beeped steadily. Sarah held one baby in her arms while the other rested on the bed under warm blankets. When she finally looked up, she found Jonathan still there, watching. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were fixed, not on the doctors, not on the monitors, on the children. And for the first time that night, Sarah realized he hadn't simply handed her a blanket and walked away. He had stayed. The emergency room quieted after the rush. The twins were now connected to IV lines, their small chests rising and falling with steadier rhythm. A nurse adjusted the monitors, leaving behind the soft chorus of beeps. Sarah sat on a hard plastic chair, her arms folded tightly around herself. Her clothes were still damp from the snow, her shoes leaving faint wet marks on the linoleum. She kept glancing at the boys, then at the chart clipped to the bed, as if by staring hard enough she could will the numbers into better ranges. Across the room, Jonathan leaned against the wall. His tailored coat, out of place under the fluorescent lights, hung loosely from one shoulder. He looked like a man used to commanding boardrooms, not hospital bays. And yet he hadn't left. "Mr. Reed?" The doctor stepped in, holding a tablet. "The boys are stable for now, but we'll need to keep them overnight for observation. Malnutrition has weakened their immune systems. Any longer in the cold could have been dangerous." Sarah swallowed hard. Her throat was raw. "So they'll be okay?" "With proper nutrition and care, yes," the doctor said gently. "But they'll need follow-up, regular checkups, a structured plan." He glanced briefly at Jonathan, then back at Sarah. "Do you have insurance, ma'am?" Her lips parted, then closed. The silence spoke for itself. Jonathan's voice filled the gap. "Put everything under my account. They'll have what they need." Sarah turned sharply toward him, her eyes wide. "You can't." "I can," Jonathan replied, calm but final. She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask for this. I can't pay you back." Jonathan's gaze was steady, unreadable. "It's not about repayment. It's about those children breathing tonight, instead of struggling." The words hung in the sterile air, heavier than the hum of machines. Sarah pressed her hands together, torn between gratitude and shame. She had fought so hard not to depend on anyone. And here was a stranger. No, not just a stranger. A man whose life was galaxies away from hers, making choices on her behalf. The doctor excused himself, leaving them in the dim light of the monitors. One of the twins stirred, letting out a soft cry. Sarah rushed to his side, laying her hand gently against his hair until he settled again. Jonathan watched, something flickering across his expression. For a moment, he saw not the frail boy in the hospital bed, but the shadow of another small child he once held, before life had ripped that chance away. He clenched his jaw and turned his gaze aside. Sarah whispered, almost to herself, "I just wanted milk. Just enough for one night." Her voice cracked, the truth spilling in the quiet. "I didn't think anyone would stop." Jonathan didn't answer right away. He studied the floor, the sterile tiles reflecting the harsh light above. Then, in a voice low enough that it sounded more like confession than comfort, he said, "Sometimes the person who stops isn't planning to either." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It carried the weight of two separate lives, colliding under the cold hum of hospital lights. Outside, snow began to fall again, brushing against the glass windows in quiet patterns, as if the city itself was listening. The night stretched into early morning. The hospital lights dimmed, but the world inside never truly slept. Nurses moved quietly from room to room, their shoes whispering against polished floors. Sarah sat at the bedside of her twins. Their tiny hands rested under warm blankets, IV lines feeding them what she could not provide. Her head was heavy with exhaustion, but she forced herself awake, afraid that if she closed her eyes she would wake to another loss. Jonathan stood a few feet away, arms folded, gaze fixed on the boys. He hadn't said much since the doctor left, and silence had settled between him and Sarah like a fragile truce. Finally, Sarah broke it. Her voice was low, careful. "Why are you still here?" Jonathan looked at her, then at the boys again. "Because I know what it feels like to sit in this room and wonder if a child will survive the night." The honesty in his tone startled her. She wanted to ask more, but his eyes were set on the monitors, distant, carrying memories she didn't dare disturb. A nurse entered with a clipboard. "Mr. Reed, the billing department needs your signature for the deposit." Jonathan signed without hesitation. Sarah flinched at the sound of the pen scratching paper. Every stroke felt like another debt she could never repay. When the nurse left, she whispered, "You shouldn't do this for us." Jonathan turned, meeting her eyes directly. "And you shouldn't have to beg on a sidewalk for milk." The words cut deep, not in cruelty, but in truth. Sarah's lips parted, but no answer came. She looked back at her boys, their fragile breathing syncing with the soft beep of machines. Minutes passed. Then Jonathan's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his coat pocket, the glow illuminating his face. Sarah saw the name flash across the screen, Board Chairman. He declined the call without hesitation and slid the phone back. "You ignored it," she murmured. Jonathan exhaled, almost amused at himself. For once, yes. It was a small act, but in that sterile room it felt monumental. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaustion finally pulling at her. Her eyes closed despite her resistance. Jonathan stayed, unmoving, a silent figure in the corner of the room. His presence was both unsettling and strangely steadying. As dawn crept through the narrow hospital windows, light fell across the bed where the twins slept more peacefully than they had in days. Sarah stirred awake, blinking against the pale glow. Jonathan was still there. The night had drawn a thin line between their worlds, hers of survival, his of power. But for a few fragile hours, that line had blurred. The morning light painted the hospital corridors in muted gray. Nurses switched shifts, their clipped voices mixing with the rhythmic beeping of machines. For Sarah, it felt like the world outside had kept moving while she remained suspended in this sterile room. Jonathan had finally stepped out for coffee. His absence left the space too quiet, the silence pressing against her chest. She smoothed the blanket over her sons, whispering their names as if to anchor herself. The door opened. A hospital administrator entered, crisp suit, clipboard in hand. His tone was professional but cold. "Mrs. Harper, I need to confirm your insurance information." Sarah froze. "I told the nurse last night, I don't have any." The man's pen scratched across the form. "In that case, these are the preliminary charges. Additional costs may accrue depending on treatment." He slid a paper across the bed tray. Sarah's eyes fell on the numbers, more than she had ever seen on a single page. Her throat tightened. She signed anyway, hands trembling, knowing she had no way to pay. When Jonathan returned, 2 coffees in hand, he noticed the folded paper clenched in her fist. "What's that?" She tried to hide it, but he reached gently, not demanding, only waiting. Reluctantly, she passed it to him. His jaw tightened as he scanned the charges. "They shouldn't have given this to you. Not like this." Her voice broke. "It doesn't matter how. I can't pay for it. I can't even pay for yesterday." Jonathan placed the coffee down untouched. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Sarah, listen to me. I told you I'll cover it. Every cent." Tears stung her eyes, part anger, part relief. "Why? You don't even know us." For the first time, Jonathan's mask slipped. his hand tightened around the bill, crumpling the edge. Because once I sat where you are, and no one came. The confession hung between them.